So the 2021 NBA offseason is basically over, and just like every year, there are big winners and big losers in the offseason. And in my opinion, this year's 2021 NBA offseason, the biggest winners are the Los Angeles Lakers. And that's led me to make this video where I'll be giving some reasons as why the Los Angeles Lakers are the biggest winners of this year's offseason. Before we get into the video, I ask you to drop a like on this video as it does help my channel grow. Subscribe to my channel if you want daily NBA content, and if you want to help me reach my goal of 1,500 subscribers. I also ask you to drop a comment on this video to start a conversation with me, because I actually do respond to all of my comments. And play that intro. The first reason the Los Angeles Lakers are the biggest winners of the 2021 offseason is due to the fact that the Lakers didn't really lose anyone of significance on their team. Yes, they did lose a few role players, but that just proves this Lakers team wasn't as talented as most people thought. There's literally just Anthony Davis and LeBron and a bunch of decent role players. Role players they lost was Kyle Kuzma, who was actually pretty solid in the regular season and underrated, but in the playoffs he was just dreadfully awful. So losing him, in my opinion, isn't too big of a deal, and I think most people would agree with that for sure. I think losing Montrezl Harrell was probably one of their biggest losses, because I think if he was given more playtime in the playoffs, he could have done way better, because he was literally just the 6th man of the year the prior season, but nonetheless he was a defensive liability, so maybe losing him isn't too big of a deal. Contavious Caldwell-Pope was a solid 3-and-D player, but he wasn't playing well in the postseason, and just for his whole career he's been known as a really inconsistent player who you can't rely on full time. So you could argue that there's other suitors who could come in and do his job at a better level. They also lost Alex Caruso, and I think that might be their biggest loss, since he was a pretty good 3-point shooter and he was one of the best perimeter defenders on this team, but he could definitely be replaced. Markieff Morris, they lost him to the Miami Heat. He didn't really play much of the postseason and he was pretty inconsistent, but he was a pretty good regular season player. And Dennis Schroeder was pretty okay in the regular season, but in the playoffs he was just absolutely horrible, and it was clear that he needed to go. He was not a good fit on this team and with LeBron, and he was way too inconsistent. So the reason I think the Lakers are the biggest winners of the offseason is due to the fact that they didn't lose anyone of significance, and I'm going to discuss later in the video that even though they lost some guys who played a role for them, they got guys who could come in and fill that spot and do it probably at an even better level. The second reason the Los Angeles Lakers are the biggest winners of the offseason is due to the fact that although they lost some pretty solid role players, in return they got some different role players who could come in and replace them. And I'd argue that some of these guys can do an even better job than the previous role players. They signed Trevor Ariza, who although he's pretty old, he showed he could still be a good 3-point shooter, and on defense he's at least an average to an above average defender, and that's all they really need from him. They also signed him to a veteran minimum, meaning they didn't overpay for him. They also got Dwight Howard back, and people don't realize he's actually one of the best defensive centers in the league, and he's one of the best backups in the whole NBA. You could argue he's the best backup center in the whole NBA, and I think he will be huge for them in the playoffs, because he could play alongside Anthony Davis, and he could just be a good backup and hold down the court on the defensive side of the floor. They also signed Wayne Ellington. He shot over 40% from 3. He's a guy who I think will feast on the wide open looks Westbrook and LeBron gives him. They also signed Kent Bazemore to the veteran minimum. He's a guy who shot over 40% from 3 last season. He's also not a liability on the defensive side of the floor, as I'd say he's an average to above average defender. I think he fits perfectly. They also signed Carmelo Anthony, who although he's not a good defender at all, he actually is a liability on the defensive side of the floor. He still shot over 40% from 3 last season, so at least at times he could come in and space the floor at a good level, and he can kind of create his own shot still. They also signed Malik Monk, who shot over 40% from 3 last season. He's a guy who could get on fire, kind of like J.R. Smith. He can also attack the rim and finish. They also got Kendrick Nunn from the Miami Heat, which I think was their best signing, because he's generally a player who's good enough to be a starting point guard in the NBA. Don't forget, last season he averaged 14 points and 3 rebounds, shooting 48% from the field and 38% from 3. He's a guy who could space the floor, but he's really good at attacking the rim. He's not much of a passer, but he doesn't really really need to be a passer on a team of LeBron and Westbrook. He could just really score and create his own shot. I think that's something the Lakers could really use, because last year they didn't have a secondary shot creator outside of LeBron. Also, Kendrick Nunn's a pretty good defender. So overall, the Lakers lost a bunch of quality role players, but they got some better role players, because I believe Trevor Ariza is better than Kyle Kuzma. Dwight Howard is going to be better than Montrezl Harrell, at least fit-wise. Wayne Ellington is a better shooter and he's more consistent than Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. I don't really know if Alex Caruso is a better basketball player than Malik Monk, but I think Monk is a better scorer, and I think that's what the Lakers need, because they weren't that good on offense last year. And I think Ken Bazemore is just as good as Markieff Morris, and I honestly and genuinely think that Kendrick Nunn is better than Dennis Schroeder. So the Lakers clearly got better when it comes to their role player. The third reason the Los Angeles Lakers are the biggest winners of the offseason is due to the fact that they got Russell Westbrook. And I know a lot of people have critiqued this move, saying that it's not a perfect fit and things like that. And I'm not going to lie, you're not wrong if you think it's not a perfect fit, because it isn't a perfect fit at all. On paper, it actually looks like a disastrous fit. But I truly believe it's a W, because during the regular season, Russell Westbrook is always a guy who plays at a top 15 level. And that means, like, during the regular season, LeBron can take more of a rest. He doesn't have to carry the load as much in the regular season, meaning he can be 100 in the playoffs. And after all, the three-point shooting the Lakers acquired, I'm certain that floor spacing won't be as big as a problem as most people were expecting it to be when they first traded for Russ. And Russ is just a player who demands a lot of attention from the defense. He's great at attacking the rim, and he's just going to make things way easier for LeBron and Anthony Davis. A lot of people like to only discuss the negatives around Russell Westbrook's game. They don't like to talk about how much things he does at a good level. There's honestly quite a lot. He's a secondary playmaker on this team, and he's going to really help them, because last year, outside of LeBron, no one else was really creating at a good level. So trust me when I say this, Russell Westbrook will help the Lakers. The fourth reason the Los Angeles Lakers are the biggest winners of the 2021 NBA offseason is due to the fact that the Lakers have now made their own big three of Russell Westbrook, LeBron James, and Anthony Davis. And you might be wondering why this is so significant. The reason it's significant is because around the whole entire NBA, nearly every team that's competing for a championship has a big three. And going into this offseason, the Lakers didn't really have a big three, because their third best player was like Dennis Schroeder, and he proved to just be an average point guard. That's not a proper big three. Even teams like the Golden State Warriors had a big three, because they're going to get Klay Thompson back. They already had Steph Curry and Draymond Green. Brooklyn Nets obviously have a really good big three, which is probably the best in the NBA, and Kevin Durant, James Harden, and Kyrie Irving. Even the Milwaukee Bucks had a really good big three of Giannis Antetokounmpo, Chris Middleton, and Jrue Holiday. The Phoenix Suns already had a big three of Devin Booker, Chris Paul, and DeAndre Ayton. The Utah Jazz have a big three of Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gobert, and Mike Conley. So basically what my point is that the Lakers were only favored against other teams, like with their big threes, was because they had two superstars, whereas most teams didn't have that. But now the Lakers have a legit third best player who is just as good as all the other teams' third best player. And I feel like that makes them so much more of a better team, and I feel like it will drastically increase the chance they win the championship, especially when it comes to them facing the Brooklyn Nets in the NBA Finals. To conclude the video, the Lakers are clearly the winners of this year's offseason. The only team that competes with them for the number one spot is probably the Chicago Bulls, because they came from being a team that's not even making the play-in tournament all the way to being a team that I could legitimately see getting a home court advantage in the playoffs this season. But I think the Lakers are the winners just because they drastically increased their chances of winning the championship. But nonetheless, the Lakers are definitely winners, and you can't dispute that. Anyways, guys, that's it for the video. Let me know whether or not you think the Lakers are the biggest winners of the offseason. Drop a like on this video, as it does help my channel grow. Subscribe to my channel if you want daily NBA content like this, as I post every single day. Also, if you want to reach my goal of 1,500 subscribers, drop a comment on this video, as I respond to all of my comments, and I'm out.